In the dazzling world of high fashion and wealth, Lena Rivers has finally made it. A self-made designer, she's ready to showcase her latest collection at an exclusive gala hosted by the powerful Devereaux family. But what should have been a career-defining moment turns into something far more sinister. At the heart of the glamour, Lena witnesses a public humiliation. Eleanor Devereaux, the privileged daughter of the family, cruelly berates Rosa Martinez, a seamstress barely scraping by. Lena can't ignore the painful echoes of her own past and steps in to defend Rosa, igniting a chain of events that will uncover dangerous secrets. As Lena digs deeper into the Devereaux' hidden world, she uncovers a web of manipulation, betrayal, and a sinister plot to amass even more wealth at the cost of human lives. But what she didn't expect was how personally connected she is to their dark schemes. Now, with the weight of a family secret hanging over her, Lena must make a choice. Walk away and protect her hard-won success, or risk everything to expose the truth and bring justice to those who can't fight for themselves. In the silver thread, the lines between wealth and poverty, loyalty and betrayal, are woven tighter than ever. Will Lena unravel the truth before it's too late? Lena stood by the window of her studio, watching the bustle of the New York streets below. In her hands, she held the gilded invitation, the heavy cards stock cool against her fingertips. She reread the elegant script for the 10th time that morning. The Devereaux family requests the honor of your presence at the annual Devereaux Gala. Claudia, her assistant, leaned against Lena's desk, eyeing her with a grin. That's it, Lena. You've made it. The Devereaux Gala is where all the biggest names in fashion and business meet. You're in. Lena smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. I know. She hesitated, her fingers tracing the gold lettering. I don't know if I belong there. These people are different, wealthy in a way I can't even fathom. Claudia crossed her arms, her expression softening. You've earned this, Lena. You've built something incredible from nothing. It's not about where you came from, it's about where you are now. Lena sighed and nodded. You're right. It's just intimidating. Trust me, you'll blow them away, Claudia said, her confidence unwavering. Now, let's talk dresses. You need to look as stunning as your designs. Effect. Lena decides to attend, setting the stage for her entrance into the world of the wealthy elite. The ballroom shimmered under the light of crystal chandeliers, their brilliance bouncing off polished marble floors and gilded walls. Lena stepped through the grand entrance, her heart pounding as she took in the opulence around her. The guests were draped in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, their laughter and conversation floating through the air like expensive perfume. She felt a pang of uncertainty. Do I really belong here? Her eyes wandered over the crowd until they landed on a woman standing in the shadows near the edge of the room. Rosa Martinez, a seamstress she recognized from her time in the industry, stood quietly, adjusting the hem of a guest's gown. Her movements were quick and practiced, but her expression was one of quiet resignation. Lena's chest tightened. She recognized that look all too well, the exhaustion of someone who worked tirelessly without recognition. Rosa's place in this room was not as a guest, but as a servant. As Lena watched, a sharp voice cut through the noise. This is unacceptable. Effect. Lena becomes acutely aware of the social divide in the room, particularly between the wealthy guests and the workers like Rosa. All heads turned toward Eleanor Devereaux, the youngest daughter of the family hosting the gala. Her icy blue eyes narrowed as she pointed accusingly at Rosa, who stood frozen, clutching the fabric of Eleanor's gown. You ruined this dress, Eleanor hissed, her voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. Look at this stitching. It's a disaster. How could you let this happen on such an important night? Rosa's face paled, her hands trembling as she tried to apologize. I'm sorry, Miss Devereaux, I don't care about your excuses, Eleanor interrupted, her tone dripping with contempt. You've embarrassed me in front of everyone. The crowd murmured in amusement, their eyes flicking between Eleanor and Rosa, entertained by the unfolding drama. Lena's stomach churned. She could see the humiliation on Rosa's face, the tears welling in her eyes as she stood helpless under Eleanor's scrutiny. The scene brought back memories of her own struggles, when she'd been treated as less than human simply because of her background. Without thinking, Lena stepped forward. That's enough. Effect. Lena, unable to stand by, feels compelled to intervene and stop the public humiliation. Eleanor's eyes snapped to Lena, her expression darkening. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cold and challenging. "You don't have to speak to her that way," Lena said firmly, her heart racing but her resolve strong. "Rosa did nothing wrong. The dress is fine." Eleanor's lips curled into a mocking smile. "And who are you to tell me how to speak to my staff?" "Oh, that's right. You're the new designer everyone's talking about." She looked Lena up and down, her gaze dismissive. "You may have made it into this room, but don't forget where you came from. We all know what people like you are really worth." Lena bristled but refused to back down. "People like me? Or people like Rosa? The ones who actually work for their place here?" Eleanor's smile faded, her eyes flashing with anger. "You don't know anything about me or my family. Watch yourself, Rivers, before you say something you regret." But Lena didn't flinch. She held Eleanor's gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "Maybe I don't know everything, but I know when someone's being cruel for no reason." For a moment, the air between them was tense, charged with unspoken hostility. Then, with a dramatic flick of her wrist, Eleanor turned on her heel and strode away, leaving Rosa standing there, her eyes wide with disbelief. Effect. Lena's confrontation with Eleanor ignites her determination to protect Rosa and uncover the truth about the Devereaux family. Later, outside the grand ballroom, Lena found Rosa sitting on a bench in the garden, her face streaked with tears. The cool night air was a welcome contrast to the heat of the confrontation. Lena sat down beside her. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Rosa shook her head, wiping her eyes. "It's not your fault. It's just how things are. Eleanor, she's always been like this. I've learned to keep my head down, do my job, and not cause trouble." "That's not right, Rosa," Lena said softly. "You don't deserve to be treated like that." Rosa let out a bitter laugh. "Maybe, but I need this job. It's not just me. It's my family. I can't afford to make enemies." Lena's heart ached for her. She knew what it was like to feel trapped, to need something so desperately that you put up with the worst just to survive. But something about the way Eleanor had spoken to Rosa tonight had struck a deeper chord. It wasn't just a tantrum. It was part of something bigger, something darker. "Rosa, has anything like this happened before?" Lena asked, her voice low. "With Eleanor or the Devereaux family?" Rosa hesitated, her eyes downcast. "It's not just me. The Devereaux, they've always used people like me. People who don't have anywhere else to go. I've seen it happen so many times. People just disappear. No one asks questions because they don't want to lose their jobs." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. "Disappear?" Rosa nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "They ruin people's lives, Lena. And no one does anything because they're too powerful." Lena sat in silence for a moment, processing what she just heard. She had come to this gala expecting to network, to showcase her designs and build her career. But now, she was being pulled into something much bigger than herself. She looked at Rosa, seeing the fear and pain in her eyes, and made a decision. "I'm going to help you," Lena said, her voice firm. "Whatever it takes, I'm going to help." Rosa looked at her, a flicker of hope breaking through her despair. "But how? You saw what happened tonight. People like us can't fight them." Lena stood, her determination solidifying. "Maybe we can't do it alone, but together, we can make sure they don't get away with this." Lena stepped off the subway into the heart of Queens, the contrast between the opulence of the Devereaux Gala and the reality of Rosa's neighborhood striking. She made her way through the crowded streets until she arrived at a modest apartment building. The walls were chipped, the lobby uninviting, but it was a world Lena recognized, a world she'd come from. Rosa opened the door, her face lighting up with a hesitant smile. "Lena, I wasn't expecting you." "I wanted to check in on you," Lena replied, stepping inside. The apartment was small, but warm, the faint scent of home-cooked meals filling the air. "Are you doing okay after everything?" Rosa sighed, leading Lena to a worn couch. "I'm used to it. Eleanor has always been like that. The Devereaux, They're untouchable. It's not just her. It's the entire family. Lena frowned. What do you mean? Rosa looked down at her hands. They've used people like me for years. Seamstresses, gardeners, maids, anyone they can control. They make you feel like you need them, and then they treat you like you're nothing. Lena's heart sank. She knew the feeling all too well. Why doesn't anyone speak up? Because they can't, Rosa said softly. People who do disappear. I've seen it happen. It's like they have a way of making people vanish, like they never existed. Lena sat back, her mind racing. Disappear? Rosa nodded, her expression haunted. It's not just me. They ruin lives, Lena. Effect. Lena realizes the depth of the Devereaux family's exploitation and feels morally compelled to investigate further. Back at her studio, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the Devereaux than met the eye. She spent hours searching through news articles, blogs, and obscure forums, looking for anything that might shed light on their history. It didn't take long to find troubling patterns. Multiple employees who had worked for the family over the years had left under mysterious circumstances. Some had vanished entirely, while others had suffered public scandals, ruining their reputations beyond repair. The more Lena read, the more it seemed that Eleanor wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. Lena leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. There were whispers, rumors of manipulation, blackmail, even threats. Lena clicked on an old news article. One line stood out. Another former employee of the Devereaux family leaves under mysterious circumstances. There was something darker here, something hidden beneath the glamorous surface of their wealth. Effect. Lena becomes deeply suspicious of Eleanor's history and begins to suspect that she may be involved in more sinister activities. You're playing with fire, Lena, Claudia said, shaking her head. They sat in Lena's studio the next morning, the tension between them palpable. The Devereaux family isn't just rich, they're powerful. If you go after them, they'll destroy you. Lena paced the room, her frustration bubbling to the surface. I can't just let them get away with it. Rosa deserves better. How many other people have they crushed along the way? Claudia leaned forward, her voice low. I get it, I do. But you have to think about your career. You've worked too hard to throw it all away because of some vendetta. You're finally where you want to be. Is this really worth risking everything? Lena stopped, her back to Claudia. It's not about a vendetta, she said quietly. It's about doing what's right. Claudia sighed. Just be careful, okay? You're not like them. They'll protect their own, no matter what. Lena turned, her eyes steely. I don't want to be like them. Effect? Claudia's warning highlights the risks Lena is taking, but Lena remains determined to pursue the truth despite the potential consequences. Lena's next step was to look deeper into Eleanor's finances. With some help from an old contact in the industry, she managed to gain access to a few key pieces of information. That's when she found something that made her blood run cold. A life insurance policy taken out on David Devereaux, Eleanor's father. The policy was recent, and the payout was astronomical, far more than what was typical for even a wealthy family like theirs. Lena frowned, scrolling through the details. Something about it felt wrong. Why would Eleanor need such a large policy? And why now? As Lena pieced together the clues, a sickening thought crossed her mind. What if Eleanor wasn't just manipulating people for fun? What if she was planning something far worse? Lena stared at the screen, her heart racing. She had to act fast. Effect. Lena's discovery of the insurance policy raises serious concerns about Eleanor's motives, increasing the stakes dramatically. Rosa's voice was shaking on the other end of the phone. Lena, I overheard something. Eleanor was talking to someone, Mark, I think. They mentioned an accident. Lena's stomach dropped. What kind of accident? I don't know, but it sounded bad, Rosa whispered. I'm scared, Lena. If they find out I know. Lena gripped the phone tightly. You're not alone in this, Rosa. We'll figure it out. They're dangerous, Rosa said, her voice barely audible. You don't know what they're capable of. Lena's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Eleanor was planning something terrible, and if they didn't stop her, Rosa, David, and countless others could be in real danger. We need to go to the police, Lena said firmly. No. Rosa's voice was sharp. They won't believe us. Not against people like the Devereaux. You saw what happened at the gala. Lena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Then we'll find another way. Lena sat at her desk, her computer screen glowing softly in the dimly lit room. The silence of her studio was only broken by the occasional click of her mouse as she scrolled through pages of information. She had spent the last several hours deep diving into David Devereaux's business dealings. The more she read, the clearer it became. David wasn't just a successful businessman. He was ruthless. Company after company seemed to fall into ruin shortly after being acquired by Devereaux Enterprises. Employees lost their pensions, factories were shut down, and local communities were left to deal with the fallout. And yet, David remained untouchable, his reputation as a business tycoon spotless. Lena frowned, leaning back in her chair. Eleanor learned from the best, she thought. Everything pointed to a long history of exploiting others for personal gain. Rosa wasn't the first person to suffer under their power. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was Rosa. Lena? Rosa's voice was soft, tinged with unease. I need to know, how much do you trust the Devereaux family? Lena hesitated. Honestly, I don't trust them at all. Why? Rosa sighed. I just have this feeling, like something worse is coming. It's not just Eleanor. It's the whole family. Lena's stomach tightened. I've been looking into David's past, and there's a pattern. I don't think Eleanor is the only one we need to worry about. Her father's business practices are brutal. I don't know what they're planning, Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm scared. Effect. Lena realizes the complexity of the Devereaux family's ruthlessness and begins to understand how far Eleanor might go to protect her inheritance. A few days later, Lena found herself at another one of the Devereaux events, this time held at a lavish art gallery in the city. She had been invited under the guise of networking for her fashion career, but her true purpose was to observe. She needed to see how Eleanor and David operated in their social circle. The gallery was filled with the city's elite, their voices mingling with the clinking of champagne glasses. Lena stood near the edge of the room, watching as Eleanor effortlessly moved between conversations, her smile charming and practiced. But beneath the surface, Lena could see it, the manipulation. Eleanor laughed at jokes that weren't funny, complimented people she clearly despised, and flattered those she needed on her side. It was a performance, every word and gesture carefully calculated to maintain her power. David, on the other hand, was quieter, but his presence was just as commanding. He didn't need to say much. People gravitated toward him, eager to be in his favor. Lena noticed how people's faces changed when they spoke to him. Nervous smiles, tense shoulders. They feared him. Quite the crowd, isn't it? A voice interrupted Lena's thoughts. She turned to see a tall man with dark hair and a slight smirk. Mark, he introduced himself, extending his hand. Lena's heart skipped a beat. This was the man Rosa had mentioned, the one working with Eleanor. Lena, she replied, shaking his hand, her mind racing. She needed to stay calm, but inside, alarm bells were ringing. I've heard a lot about you, Mark said smoothly. Eleanor speaks highly of your work. Does she? Lena kept her voice steady. I didn't realize she was such a fan. Mark chuckled. Oh, she has an eye for talent. Lena felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something dangerous about the way Mark spoke, like he knew far more than he was letting on. Effect. Lena witnesses how Eleanor manipulates those around her, and her fear for Rosa and David deepens as she comes face to face with Mark. Later that night, Lena couldn't stop thinking about her encounter with Mark. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was more involved in whatever Eleanor was planning than she initially realized. She decided to dig deeper. Back at her studio, Lena searched for anything she could find about Mark. After hours of searching, she found it. A string of criminal charges, mostly fraud and embezzlement. But nothing had ever stuck. He was always one step ahead, slipping through legal loopholes. Of course, Lena muttered to herself. It all made sense now. Mark was Eleanor's partner, not just in crime, but in everything. He had the experience and connections to carry out whatever scheme they were planning. Her phone buzzed again. It was a text from Rosa. Rosa, we need to meet. It's about Eleanor. Lena's pulse quickened. She grabbed her coat and headed out, knowing that whatever Rosa had to tell her could be the key to everything. Lena arrived at the cafe where she was supposed to meet Rosa, but to her surprise, it wasn't Rosa waiting for her, it was Eleanor. Eleanor smiled coldly as Lena approached, gesturing for her to sit. I thought we should talk. Lena hesitated, her mind racing. Where was Rosa? Why was Eleanor here instead? I know you've been poking around where you shouldn't, Eleanor said, her voice low and dangerous. I also know that you're not just interested in fashion. So let's make this easy. Stay out of my business. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. What are you talking about? Eleanor leaned in, her eyes narrowing. I know about your little investigation. I know about the insurance policy. And I know you've been talking to Rosa. Lena's blood ran cold. Eleanor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You don't want to make an enemy of me, Lena. Trust me, you're not ready for what that would mean. Lena gripped the edge of the table, her mind racing. She couldn't let Eleanor scare her off, but the threat was real. I'm not afraid of you, she said, though her voice wavered slightly. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. You should be. I know all about you, Lena. I know where you came from, how hard you've worked to get here. But I also know how easy it would be to take it all away. Lena's stomach twisted. Eleanor wasn't just threatening her career. She was threatening her entire life. Effect. Lena feels the threat escalate, but despite Eleanor's warning, she refuses to back down. After Eleanor left, Lena sat in the cafe, trying to calm her racing heart. She pulled out her phone and dialed Rosa's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic surged through her. Where was Rosa? She tried calling again, but there was still no answer. Lena grabbed her coat and hurried out of the cafe, her mind filled with worst-case scenarios. She had to find Rosa, had to make sure she was safe. By the time she reached Rosa's apartment, the fear had settled like a weight in her chest. She knocked on the door, but there was no response. Lena knocked again, harder this time. Finally, the door creaked open and Rosa appeared, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. Rosa, what's going on? Why didn't you meet me? Rosa shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. She knows, Lena. Eleanor knows everything. She found out I've been talking to you. She threatened me. She threatened my family. Lena's heart sank. Rosa, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I shouldn't have involved you. Rosa shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, Lena, it's not your fault, but I'm scared. I don't know what to do. Lena took Rosa's hands in hers, her voice steady. We're going to fix this. We're going to stop her. But we need to act fast. Rosa nodded, her grip tightening. I trust you. Lena's mind was already racing, formulating a plan. They had to expose Eleanor and Mark before it was too late, before anyone else got hurt. Lena sat in her car, parked just outside the Devereaux office building, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was 11:30 p.m. Most of the building's lights were off, except for the faint glow from a few upper floors. Tonight, she was taking the biggest risk yet. She checked her phone for messages from Rosa. Nothing. It had taken days to work up the courage, but now Lena had no choice. She had to break into Eleanor's office to find the proof that could save David and stop Eleanor's plan. Lena slipped out of her car, pulling her coat tighter around her as she approached the building's side entrance. Her hands trembled slightly as she swiped the key card Rosa had helped her obtain. One of the maintenance staff had quietly passed it along, hoping to help expose the Devereaux's corruption. The door clicked open. Inside, the building was eerily silent. Lena's footsteps echoed as she moved down the empty hallway, her heart racing with every step. She reached the elevator and took it up to the top floor, where Eleanor's private office was located. Once inside, Lena wasted no time. She turned on the computer and, after a few attempts, cracked Eleanor's password. She opened the email inbox and began searching through the most recent messages. Her eyes scanned subject lines, policy, accident, estate, until she found the one she needed. An email chain between Eleanor and Mark, the details of their plot to stage David's accidental death for the insurance payout. Lena's breath caught in her throat. This is it. This is what we need. She quickly forwarded the emails to herself and saved a copy on a flash drive. But before she could finish, the door creaked open behind her. Lena. Lena spun around, her heart lurching in her chest. Mark stood in the doorway, his expression cold and calculating. Effect. Lena now has the evidence but realizes that her danger has just increased exponentially with Mark confronting her. Mark stepped inside the office, closing the door behind him. His eyes flicked toward the computer screen, where the incriminating emails were still open. Lena's pulse quickened as she realized he knew exactly what she had been doing. You shouldn't have come here, Mark said calmly, his voice laced with menace. Now you've seen too much. Lena swallowed hard, her mind racing for an escape plan. It's over, Mark. I have everything I need. Eleanor's plan won't work. Mark smirked. You think you can just walk out of here and expose us? You really don't understand how this works, do you? Lena felt her legs tense, ready to run, but she knew Mark would catch her before she could reach the door. She needed to stall. David deserves to know the truth, Lena said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her veins. He deserves to know that his own daughter is planning to kill him for money. Mark's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the smirk disappeared. David is a fool, just like you. He won't believe you. He'll believe his daughter, the perfect Eleanor. You? You're nothing. Lena's fingers tightened around the flash drive in her pocket. I'm not nothing, and I'm not afraid of you. Mark took a step closer, his tone turning darker. You should be. Because if you continue with this little investigation of yours, it won't just be your career that we destroy. It'll be you and Rosa. Lena's stomach dropped at the mention of Rosa. She couldn't let anything happen to her. Before Mark could move any closer, Lena lunged for the door. She yanked it open and bolted down the hallway, her footsteps echoing loudly as she ran for the elevator. Mark shouted behind her, his footsteps pounding after her, but Lena didn't stop. She slammed her hand against the elevator button, praying for it to open. The doors slid open just in time, and she darted inside, frantically pressing the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, she caught a final glimpse of Mark's furious face before the elevator descended. Effect: Lena escapes with the evidence, but Mark's threats leave her shaken and aware of the danger she and Rosa now face. Back at her studio, Lena sat at her desk, the flash drive in front of her, her mind racing. She had the proof she needed, but now she had to figure out how to use it without putting herself and Rosa in even more danger. She couldn't confront Eleanor and Mark directly. They were too powerful. She needed to be smart about this. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was Claudia. Lena? What the hell is going on? You've been acting strange for days. Lena hesitated. She had kept Claudia in the dark to protect her, but now she needed help. Claudia, I found something. Something big. I need your help. Claudia's voice grew serious. What did you find? Lena quickly explained everything. Eleanor's plan, the life insurance policy, and the emails between her and Mark. As she spoke, she could hear the disbelief in Claudia's voice, but by the end, Claudia was silent. So, what do we do? Claudia finally asked, her tone steady. We can't just sit on this. I know, Lena said, but we can't just go to the police either. Eleanor and Mark will deny everything. We need David to see the truth for himself. If he sees the emails, maybe he'll believe us. But how are we going to get to him? He's surrounded by people who will protect Eleanor. Lena thought for a moment. We'll have to go to his estate. Rosa can come with me. David knows her. Maybe she can help convince him. Claudia sighed. This is insane, but I'm in. Effect: Lena, Claudia, and Rosa devise a plan to confront David with the evidence, though it will put them all at great personal risk. The next morning, Lena and Rosa sat in Lena's car, parked a few blocks away from David's private estate. Rosa's hands trembled slightly as she stared at the massive gates in the distance. I don't know if I can do this, Lena, Rosa whispered, her voice shaking. What if Eleanor finds out? What if David doesn't believe us? Lena reached over and squeezed her hand. You can do this, Rosa. We're in this together. We have the proof. We just need to get David to listen. Rosa nodded, taking a deep breath. Okay, let's do this. They approached the estate, and after a tense conversation with the security guards, they were escorted inside. The sprawling mansion loomed ahead, its manicured lawns and towering trees a stark contrast to the chaos brewing inside. David was waiting for them in his study, his expression curious but guarded as they entered. "Lena, Rosa," he greeted them, his voice polite but distant. "What brings you here?" Lena stepped forward, her heart pounding. "David, we need to talk. It's about Eleanor." At the mention of his daughter, David's brow furrowed. "What about Eleanor?" Lena glanced at Rosa, who nodded for her to continue. "We found something you need to see." She pulled out the flash drive and handed it to David. "These are emails between Eleanor and Mark. They've been planning to stage your accidental death for the insurance money." David's face went pale, his hand trembling slightly as he stared at the flash drive. "What are you talking about?" "Please, just look at the emails," Lena insisted. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't serious." David hesitated, his expression torn between disbelief and fear. Effect: Lena and Rosa present the evidence to David, but his skepticism creates tension as he struggles to process the shocking accusation. Before David could insert the flash drive into his laptop, the door to the study burst open. Eleanor stormed in, her face twisted with fury, followed closely by Mark. "What the hell is going on?" Eleanor demanded, her eyes blazing as she glanced between Lena, Rosa, and her father. Lena's heart skipped a beat, but she stood her ground. "David knows, Eleanor. He's going to see the emails." Eleanor's expression darkened, and she turned to her father, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Dad, you don't actually believe this nonsense, do you? They're trying to manipulate you. This is all a setup." David looked between his daughter and Lena, uncertainty clouding his features. "They're lying," Eleanor insisted, her voice rising. "They've been planning this for weeks. They want to take everything from you." Mark, who had remained silent until now, took a step forward, his face calm but his eyes cold. "David, you know me. You know Eleanor. This is ridiculous." David's hands shook as he stared at the flash drive in his hand. "I don't know what to believe." "Believe us," Rosa said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Please, David. We've only ever wanted to protect you." For a long moment, the room was silent, the tension palpable. Finally, David turned to the laptop, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Eleanor's eyes widened, and she lunged forward. "No, don't." But it was too late. David clicked open the emails, and as the messages filled the screen, his face went white with shock. David stood frozen, staring at the damning emails displayed on his laptop screen. His eyes, wide with disbelief, darted between the screen and Eleanor, whose face had gone pale. The silence in the room was deafening, tension crackling like static electricity. You did this?" David's voice trembled with a mixture of anger and heartbreak as he turned to his daughter. Eleanor, realizing that the web of lies she had spun was starting to collapse, scrambled to regain control. "No, Dad, it's not what it looks like." Her voice was shrill, desperation creeping in. "Lena and Rosa, they're manipulating you. They're trying to take everything from us." David shook his head, his voice growing stronger. "I have the proof, Eleanor. These emails, your conversations with Mark. How could you do this?" Eleanor's eyes flashed with panic. She turned toward Rosa, her lips curling into a sneer. "Of course, it's her fault," she snapped. "Rosa's been feeding you lies, hasn't she?" Eleanor stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. "Do you think people like her care about you, Dad? She's just a maid." Lena stepped forward, her heart pounding. "This isn't about Rosa. It's about you, Eleanor. You planned to kill your father for the money, and now you're caught." Eleanor's composure cracked, and she let out a frustrated scream, throwing a vase across the room, shattering it into pieces. "Shut up. You don't know anything." David's face fell as he saw his daughter's mask slip. "How did we get here, Eleanor?" His voice was broken, filled with disbelief. "How did I raise someone capable of this?" Effect: Eleanor's facade begins to crumble as she lashes out, her desperation making her more dangerous. Mark had been standing in the corner, watching the exchange with a stoic expression. But now, as Eleanor's outburst spiraled, he knew their plan was unraveling fast. His eyes flicked toward the door. He was already calculating his exit. "I'm not going down for this," Mark muttered, his voice low but clear enough to cut through Eleanor's ranting. Eleanor spun around, her eyes widening. "What did you say?" Mark stepped forward, his face cold and detached. "This is over, Eleanor. You've lost. I'm not getting dragged down with you." "You coward!" Eleanor screamed. "You're just going to abandon me now?" Mark's lips curled into a humorless smile. "You thought I was loyal to you? You're nothing, Eleanor. I used you just like you were using your father." David flinched at the brutal truth of Mark's words, but it was Eleanor who took it the hardest. She looked at Mark as if she'd been stabbed in the back. "You can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "You're in this as deep as I am." Mark shrugged. "Maybe, but I can cut my losses. I'll tell the cops everything, about the insurance scheme, the accident you had planned. You'll go to prison, Eleanor, not me." Lena exchanged a glance with Rosa. The situation had taken a dark turn, but now they had an unexpected advantage. With Mark ready to turn on Eleanor, the truth was fully coming to light. Effect: Mark's betrayal reveals the full scope of their plan, turning the tide and pushing Eleanor into a corner. Eleanor's anger drained from her face, replaced by an expression of pure terror. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps, and she stumbled backward, her hands trembling. You can't leave me like this," she whispered, her voice small and fragile. She looked toward David, tears spilling from her eyes. "Daddy, please. I did this for us. For you. I didn't want to lose everything when you're gone." David took a step back, his face contorted in pain. "This wasn't for me, Eleanor. This was about power. About greed." No, it wasn't." Eleanor's voice cracked as she crumbled to the floor. I was afraid. Afraid of being left with nothing when you die. Afraid that I wouldn't matter anymore. You never looked at me the way you looked at her." She pointed at Lena with shaking fingers, the bitterness in her voice palpable. David's eyes flickered with confusion. "Her? What are you talking about?" Eleanor let out a hysterical laugh. "You think I didn't see it? You spent more time praising people like Rosa and Lena, people who didn't belong in our world. But what about me? What about your daughter?" The weight of Eleanor's jealousy hit David like a punch to the gut. He had always assumed Eleanor was cold and distant by nature, but now he realized her cruelty stemmed from something far more complex, her desperate need for his approval. "I never meant to make you feel that way," David said softly, his voice thick with regret. "But this is unforgivable." Eleanor's tears flowed freely now, her once perfect exterior shattered. "I just wanted you to see me, to see that I'm important." Effect: Eleanor's breakdown reveals her deep insecurities and jealousy, exposing her emotional motivations behind the plot, leaving David devastated by the truth. The sound of sirens blared outside the estate, and within moments, police officers flooded the room. Claudia had contacted them earlier, handing over the evidence that Lena had uncovered. Eleanor barely reacted as the officers approached her, still kneeling on the floor, sobbing quietly. Mark, however, tried to slip out the door, but two officers quickly blocked his path. "Mark Lawson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder," one of the officers said as he cuffed him. Mark scowled but didn't resist. "It wasn't my plan," he muttered, casting a bitter glance at Eleanor. The officers moved toward Eleanor, who didn't struggle as they helped her to her feet. "Eleanor Devereaux, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder," they said, reciting her rights. She remained eerily quiet as they led her away. David watched in silence, his face pale and haunted. His daughter, his own flesh and blood, had planned to end his life for money. The weight of it settled heavily on him, and he slumped into a chair, exhausted. Lena stood beside Rosa, both of them watching the arrests unfold with a sense of grim satisfaction. They had succeeded, but at a cost none of them had expected. Effect: the immediate threat is removed with Eleanor and Mark's arrests, But the emotional toll on David and everyone involved remains heavy. The next morning, the estate was quiet. Lena sat with Rosa in the garden, the early sunlight casting long shadows across the grass. After the whirlwind of the night before, the silence felt strange. "Are you okay?" Lena asked softly, turning to Rosa. Rosa nodded, though her eyes were still filled with sorrow. "I never thought it would come to this, but I'm glad it's over. I'm glad you're safe." Lena smiled gently. "You're the brave one, Rosa. You stood up to them when no one else would." Rosa shook her head. "I didn't do it alone. I had you." They sat in silence for a while, both lost in thought. Finally, David approached them, his face lined with exhaustion, but there was a sense of relief in his eyes. "I don't know what to say," David began, his voice heavy with guilt. "I should have seen what was happening. I should have been a better father, a better man." "You couldn't have known," Lena replied, her voice gentle. "Eleanor was lost. She made her own choices." David nodded slowly, but the pain in his eyes didn't fade. "I owe you both an apology. For everything. You tried to protect me, and I was too blind to see it." Rosa stood and placed a hand on David's arm. "It's not too late to make things right." David smiled weakly. "I'll try. I'll make sure that what happened never happens again." Lena and Rosa exchanged a glance, knowing that while the battle had been won, the scars would take time to heal. But for the first time, there was hope. As they walked back toward the house, Lena felt a sense of peace settling over her. She had done the right thing, helped protect Rosa, saved David, and uncovered the truth. Though it had been a painful journey, they had made it through, and now it was time to move forward. Weeks had passed since the arrests, and life was beginning to settle into a new rhythm. Lena sat at her desk in the sunlight-filled studio, sketching designs for her latest collection. The chaos of the Devereaux family had left its mark, but it also brought a strange sense of clarity to her work. She now knew who she was fighting for. The door opened, and Rosa stepped inside, carrying a tray of coffee. "You've been working all morning," she said with a warm smile, placing the tray on the table. "You need a break." Lena laughed softly and pushed her chair back. "You're right. I've been in my head for hours." Rosa took a seat across from Lena, her eyes sparkling with a lightness that had been missing for so long. "It feels strange, doesn't it? After everything that happened, to just live life again." Lena nodded, sipping her coffee. "Yeah, but I think we've earned it. And more than that, you've earned this new start." Rosa smiled gratefully. "Thanks to you." "No," Lena corrected her gently. "Thanks to both of us. We stood up, and we fought back." Rosa's eyes shone with emotion. "I never thought I'd be free from them. Now, I get to work for you, in a place where I'm treated like a person. I'm not afraid anymore." Effect. Rosa and Lena reflect on the peace they found after breaking away from the Devereaux family's influence, signifying the beginning of their new chapter. Later that week, Lena received an unexpected message from David Devereaux, requesting a meeting. Though apprehensive, she agreed. They met in a quiet park outside the city, far from the opulence of his family's estate. David approached slowly, his once imposing figure now tinged with exhaustion and regret. He extended a hand toward Lena. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." Lena shook his hand and gestured for him to sit. "I wasn't sure you'd reach out after everything," David sighed, looking out over the tranquil pond in front of them. "It's taken me a while to come to terms with everything. I still don't know how I missed it all, the way Eleanor had changed, the person she'd become." Lena's voice softened. "She was your daughter, David. You wanted to see the best in her." David nodded, his voice filled with sorrow. "But I was blind. Blind to her cruelty, blind to the people I hurt along the way." He looked at Lena with a sincerity that caught her off guard. "I came to apologize. To you and to Rosa. You tried to protect me, and I failed to listen." Lena studied his face for a moment, seeing the genuine regret etched in his features. "It's not too late to make things right. Rosa's life has changed, and she's stronger now. You can still help." David smiled weakly. "I intend to. I've started working on a foundation for the workers who were mistreated by my family, to help them rebuild their lives. It won't erase what happened, but it's a start." Lena nodded, her heart softening. That's a good start. Effect. David's apology brings closure to his relationship with Lena and Rosa, offering a path to redemption and healing for everyone involved. As the months passed, Lena's career continued to flourish. Her latest collection had become a sensation, drawing attention from across the fashion world. But despite her success, Lena remained grounded, never forgetting the people who had supported her journey. One evening, she stood backstage at a fashion show, watching as her designs were paraded down the runway. Claudia appeared beside her, grinning with pride. "Look at this," Claudia said, gesturing to the crowd. "You did it, Lena. You've officially made it." Lena smiled, but there was a deeper reflection in her eyes. "I didn't do it alone. You, Rosa. Everyone helped make this happen." Claudia laughed. "Don't get all humble on me now. But I do have to admit, the way you've used your platform since the Devereaux mess, it's inspiring. You've changed how people see the fashion industry." Lena watched as the models continued to walk, each piece reflecting a part of her journey. "I just want to make sure we're lifting others up as we rise. That's what matters." Claudia nodded in agreement. "And you're doing exactly that." Effect. Lena's success is not just professional but personal as she embraces her role as a leader in both the fashion world and in advocating for justice. For Rosa, life had changed in ways she hadn't thought possible. Free from the oppressive environment of the Devereaux family, she had found joy in the little things again: her family, her work, and the freedom to live without fear. One Saturday afternoon, Lena visited Rosa at her new home. The small, charming house was filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of fresh tortillas. Rosa greeted her at the door with a beaming smile. Come in. We're just about to eat." Lena stepped inside, marveling at how different Rosa seemed now, radiant, relaxed, and at peace. The weight of years of mistreatment had lifted. As they sat down for a meal with Rosa's family, Lena couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with gratitude for how far they had come. "I never thought I could have this," Rosa said softly, as they shared stories over dinner. "A life where I'm not afraid, where I can enjoy my family and not worry about what tomorrow will bring." "You deserve it, Rosa," Lena replied. "You've always deserved this." Effect. Rosa's new life is a testament to her resilience, offering a hopeful contrast to the trauma she endured under the Devereaux family. A few weeks later, Lena and Rosa sat together in a quiet cafe, discussing their futures. The air was light, filled with the promise of new opportunities. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Rosa asked, stirring her tea thoughtfully. Lena nodded. "All the time. I know I want to keep designing, but it's more than that. I want to keep fighting for people like you, people who deserve so much more than they've been given." Rosa smiled. "You've already done so much." Lena looked out the window, watching the city move around them. "We're just getting started." Rosa raised her cup in a toast. "To new beginnings." Lena clinked her cup against Rosa's, a sense of peace and empowerment settling over her. They had faced the worst together, and now, as they stepped into the future, they knew they would continue to fight for justice, for dignity, and for each other.